My name is Tessa, and I'm 34 years old, living in a quiet town just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I've always loved Christmas, the lights, the smells, the warmth. It's the one time of year when even the cold feels like a blessing. For as long as I could remember, Christmas meant one thing: spending it with my best friend, Julia. Julia and I met in college when we both worked part-time at a bookstore. She was wild and impulsive, I was careful and predictable. Somehow that combination worked. Over the years, we became sisters by choice. She'd been my bridesmaid, my confidant, the person who'd seen me through every heartbreak. Every Christmas, we exchanged gifts, not expensive ones, but meaningful. A handmade ornament, a framed photo, a book we both loved, that was our thing. But that particular December, something about Julia felt off. She called me more often than usual, always sounding distracted. Her voice had a nervous edge, like she was keeping a secret but couldn't decide whether to spill it or bury it. When I asked her if she was okay, she laughed it off and said she was just stressed about work. "Let's make this Christmas special," she said one night over the phone. "Something we'll never forget." I laughed. "You say that every year, Jules." "No," she said quickly. "This year will really be different." I thought she meant we'd go on a trip or host a party. Julia was always dramatic like that. So, I didn't think much of it. Christmas morning came, and I was curled up on my couch with hot cocoa, watching It's a Wonderful Life. The snow outside fell in slow, lazy flakes, the kind that makes you feel like time has stopped. That's when I heard the knock on my door. Julia stood there, wearing a red coat and her signature smirk. She held a glittery silver gift bag and looked exhausted, her makeup smudged like she hadn't slept. "Merry Christmas," she said, forcing a cheeriness that didn't match her face. "Merry Christmas," I said, hugging her. "You okay?" "Just tired," she muttered. "Here, this one's for you." I smiled, taking the bag from her. "You didn't have to, I wanted to," she interrupted, glancing at her phone. "It's meaningful." I reached inside and pulled out a small red envelope tied with a gold ribbon. A handwritten note on top read, "You deserve this." I laughed softly. "Wow, mysterious." She didn't laugh back. "Open it later," she said quickly, already backing toward the door. "I have to run family stuff." "Wait, you're not staying for breakfast?" "Can't. Rain check, okay?" And then she was gone, leaving behind a faint scent of her perfume and an uncomfortable heaviness in the air. I stared at the envelope for a while before opening it. Inside were several folded papers, thick, official-looking. For a moment, I thought it was some kind of elaborate joke. But when I started reading, my heart froze. They weren't Christmas cards. They were loan documents. The papers were addressed to me, with my full legal name, address, and even my social security number. The loan amount was massive, something I could never afford. I scanned through the details, and then I saw it. My signature, at the bottom. Except it wasn't mine. It was a forgery. For a few seconds I just sat there, staring at the pages, trying to make sense of it. I thought maybe Julia had mixed up the envelopes somehow. Or maybe this was a prank, some tasteless inside joke I didn't understand. But then I saw the lender's name. It was Scott's, Julia's husband. A chill ran down my spine. I called her immediately, my hands trembling as I held the phone. She answered after the third ring, her tone too casual. "Hey, you opened it," she asked. "Julia, what is this?" I demanded. "Why are there loan papers in my name?" She sighed. "Tessa, calm down. It's not a big deal. You'll understand soon." "Not a big deal? You forged my name. It's just temporary," she said quickly, her voice tight. "Scott needed some help." "Help? You took out a loan in my name, Julia." I shouted, my voice shaking. "That's fraud. Do you even realize what you've done?" "Tessa, please," she whispered. "You're overreacting. You have good credit. We'll fix it." I couldn't breathe. My vision blurred as panic flooded through me. "Fix it?" I said, through gritted teeth. "Julia, you just handed me a debt I didn't ask for. Why would you do this to me?" There was silence on the line. Then she said, almost coldly, You wouldn't understand. And the call ended. For a few moments, I just sat there, phone in hand, the quiet of Christmas morning suddenly suffocating. The twinkling lights on my tree blurred through my tears. My best friend, my chosen sister, had just handed me financial ruin wrapped in shiny paper. I stood up, pacing the room, my thoughts spinning. I grabbed the papers again, rereading every detail, hoping I was wrong. But there it was in black and white. Her husband's name as the borrower, mine as the guarantor. And a fake version of my signature sealing the deal. The worst part wasn't the debt, it was the betrayal. Julia had used my trust as collateral. I sank to the floor, the envelope clutched in my shaking hands. All I could think about was how she'd smiled when she handed it to me, how her voice trembled just enough to betray guilt. It wasn't just money she'd taken from me, it was the foundation of everything I believed about her. I had no idea that envelope contained her husband's debt and my worst nightmare. When I opened the envelope, I expected a heartfelt letter, not financial ruin. The shock of what I held in my hands was paralyzing. My brain couldn't reconcile what my eyes were seeing. I kept flipping through the pages again and again, thinking there had to be some mistake, some explanation that would make this all go away. But no matter how many times I looked, my name was there on every single document. The loan amount was over $48,000. The date on the contract was just 2 weeks ago. There were multiple late payment warnings already issued. My mind spun. How could this even happen? How had they used my identity without me knowing? I called my bank right away, but of course, Christmas Day meant nobody was picking up. So I left message after message on the emergency fraud line, my voice trembling as I tried to explain. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept pacing my living room, replaying every conversation I'd had with Julia in the past month, searching for clues I'd missed. By morning, my phone buzzed with a call from a collections department. The man on the other end asked for me by name. "This is she," I said cautiously. "Miss Harper, we're calling about your outstanding balance." "There's been a mistake," I interrupted, heart pounding. "That account isn't mine. Someone forged my signature." He paused, clearly skeptical. "Ma'am, the documents were personally verified. It lists your address, phone number, and employment." "Because someone stole my information," I snapped, frustration spilling out. "I need this frozen immediately." He sighed, told me to file a fraud report, and hung up. That was when the panic set in for real. I dialed Julia again, fingers trembling. She didn't answer. I tried Scott's number next, straight to voicemail. By noon, I drove to their house, still in my pajamas under a heavy coat. I didn't care how I looked, I just needed answers. Their front yard was littered with deflated Christmas decorations, plastic reindeer toppled in the wind. The sight made my stomach twist. I rang the bell twice before Scott opened the door. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Tessa," he said awkwardly. "This is unexpected. I need to talk to Julia," I said firmly, pushing past him before he could stop me. "She's not feeling well," he said, closing the door halfway. "Then I'll wait," I replied, stepping into the hallway. The smell of stale alcohol and burnt candles filled the air. Julia appeared at the top of the stairs, wearing a robe and holding a mug. Her expression froze when she saw me. "Tessa," she said, forcing a smile, "you should have called first." "I did," I snapped. "You didn't answer." "What the hell is going on, Julia?" Her eyes flicked toward Scott, then back to me. "You're overreacting." "Overreacting? You stole my identity!" Her tone shifted to something defensive. "It's not stealing. It's borrowing. Just for a little while." I blinked at her, stunned. "Borrowing? You forged my signature and put me in debt." "That's not borrowing, that's fraud." Scott raised his hands. "Look, we didn't mean for it to get out of hand. We just needed some help, Tessa. The business is struggling, so you decided to ruin my life to save yours?" I shouted, tears of disbelief stinging my eyes. "How could you even think that was okay?" Julia's face twisted, and she snapped. "You wouldn't understand. You've never had to worry about money like we have." Her words hit me like a slap. "You're right. I said bitterly. I don't understand how someone could destroy their best friend for cash. I turned and walked out before I could say anything worse. The cold winter air slapped my face as I reached my car, my breath coming in short, shaky bursts. When I got home, I locked every door and sat at my kitchen table with the papers spread out like evidence. I started taking photos of every page, every forged signature. I emailed them to myself and labeled the folder, Julia, Fraud. I didn't know what I'd do next, but I knew I couldn't let this go. That evening, I called the fraud division of my bank again. This time, someone answered. I explained everything, sent them the documents, and filed an official claim. The representative assured me it would be investigated but that it might take time. Until then, she said gently, you're still legally responsible for the balance. I hung up the phone and buried my face in my hands. The weight of those words crushed me. Legally responsible. For something I didn't do. For the next few days, I lived in a fog. Every ring of my phone made my stomach drop, expecting another collection call. I couldn't eat. I couldn't focus on work. And worst of all, Julia had vanished. No texts. No calls. Not even a half-hearted apology. One night, I sat scrolling through our old messages, years of inside jokes, confessions, and love. There she was, telling me I was the only real friend she ever had. There I was, comforting her when Scott cheated, when she lost her job, when she cried over her mother's illness. All of it felt like a lie now. How long had she been planning this? Was it all fake? I couldn't help but replay her last words on the phone. You'll understand soon. What did that even mean? What was she planning? I couldn't sleep that night. Every sound outside felt suspicious, every knock made me jump. My chest ached with anger and grief, two emotions wrestling for control. That's when it hit me, I wasn't just a victim, I was a target. Julia had done this deliberately, and she wasn't planning to fix anything. That's when I realized my best friend had sold me out for money. Julia stopped answering my calls after that day. Silence replaced friendship. Days turned into weeks, and every trace of her in my life started to vanish. She blocked me on social media, my texts went unanswered. Even mutual friends claimed she'd gone quiet. It was as if Julia had dissolved into thin air. Election notices kept coming, emails, letters, even calls at my workplace. Each one was a reminder of how deeply she'd buried me in this mess. I sat in my car outside my office one night, gripping the steering wheel, staring at the glowing red notification light on my phone. Another voicemail. Same robotic tone. This is a reminder that your balance remains unpaid. I could feel my pulse in my ears. My life, my credit, my name, it was all hanging by a thread because of a woman I once called my sister. Enough was enough. The next morning, I decided to start digging. If Julia thought she could vanish and leave me to take the fall, she was wrong. I went through every old email, every text, every shared document between us. That's when I found something strange. A digital receipt for a laptop purchase, billed to my name, but delivered to Julia's address. My stomach twisted. That must have been how she'd done it, how she'd gained access to my online information. She had once borrowed my laptop after hers crashed. I remembered that day vividly. She was sitting on my couch, typing something for work. She'd smiled and said, "You trust me with your password, right?" I'd laughed and told her, "You're my best friend." Of course. Now I realized she hadn't been working. She'd been collecting. Using my laptop meant she could access my autofilled data, credit card info, personal details, saved logins, all the pieces she needed to build the fake identity she used to get that loan. Rage burned in my chest. She'd looked me in the eyes while setting me up. I took everything I found, emails, receipts, screenshots, and went to the police. The officer behind the desk looked sympathetic at first, but his expression shifted as I explained the story. "Do you have proof she forged your signature?" he asked. I showed him the papers, my voice shaking. "Look, this isn't my handwriting. You can even compare it." He nodded slowly then, leaned back in his chair. "Unfortunately, ma'am, cases like this take time. It can be hard to prove who filled out the documents unless you have direct evidence. So, what am I supposed to do? Just wait while collectors ruin my life? He sighed. You could file a civil case. Or talk to a private investigator. I left the station feeling defeated, but more determined than ever. If the system wouldn't help me, I'd help myself. I hired a private investigator named Landon Pierce, a gruff, no-nonsense man who'd seen every kind of scam imaginable. He listened quietly as I told him everything, then said, "If she used your name, there'll be a trail. People like her always leave one." Within days, he had results. He discovered that the loan application had been submitted from a work computer registered to Julia's office. Not just that the IP address matched her company's network. She did this at work, Landon said flatly. That's bold and stupid. It was more than I'd hoped for. The digital trail tied the fraud directly to her. I had leverage now. But the more Landon uncovered, the darker things got. Julia and Scott had taken out several smaller loans under fake names in the past year. They were deep in debt, their home nearly in foreclosure, Scott's business failing. I wasn't their first victim, I was just the easiest one. One night, as I sat at my desk surrounded by piles of papers, I got a message from an unknown number. You need to stop digging, it's not worth it. My blood ran cold. The text had no name, but I didn't need one. I knew that tone. I'd heard it 1,000 times when Julia wanted to shut me down in an argument. I didn't reply. I just saved the message and forwarded it to Landon. Good, he said when I told him. She's nervous. That means we're getting close. The following week, he sent me another update. Her husband's name is on the loan, but everything else address, contact info, digital signature was traced to her devices. We've got enough to start a criminal complaint. My hands shook as I read his report. I should have felt relieved, but all I felt was grief. Julia wasn't just a friend, she'd been family. I'd trusted her with everything, and she'd taken that trust and used it as currency. That night, I sat alone on my couch, scrolling through our old pictures, beach trips, birthdays, matching Christmas sweaters. I didn't recognize the woman smiling beside me anymore. It was strange how betrayal could make even memories feel counterfeit. I thought about the day she'd given me that envelope. How her smile had trembled. How she'd said, "You'll understand soon." Maybe she'd meant I'd understand desperation. Or maybe she'd meant I'd understand how it felt to lose everything. Because I wasn't going to lose everything. I had something she didn't proof. And I was about to use it. I went through every file, every photo, every message between us. Over the years, I'd kept things, receipts from dinners, emails confirming shared purchases, even voice messages. Julia used to tease me for being a hoarder of details. Now those details were my weapons. I wasn't just building a case. I was building my revenge one document at a time. But she forgot one thing. I kept every message, every receipt, every lie she'd ever sent. I wasn't going down without a fight. The shock and betrayal had burned through me like acid. But now all that was left was focus. Cold, sharp focus. Julia might have thought she'd destroyed me, but she didn't know who she was dealing with. I'd spent my whole adult life being the responsible one. The person who paid bills early. Who saved receipts. Who kept every piece of paperwork just in case. Now, that habit was going to save me. I spent days combing through every corner of my life. Building a digital folder so detailed it looked like something out of a police procedural. Every document Julia had ever signed in front of me. Every text where she mentioned money. Every bank transfer where she'd borrowed and forgotten to return what she owed. Landon, my private investigator, said he'd never seen a civilian so organized. "You sure you don't want to work for me?" he joked. I smiled, but my voice came out flat. Let's just get justice first. While Landon kept tracing digital trails, I started confronting the real-world fallout. The debt collectors, the calls, the bank, all of it. My attorney, Caroline Mendez, was young but sharp. She listened intently as I laid out the details, flipping through each document with methodical precision. After an hour, she leaned back in her chair. "This isn't just identity theft. It's a calculated fraud scheme. We can prove intent, which means you have a criminal case here, Tessa." The sound of that word criminal sent chills down my spine. What happens next? I asked. Caroline tapped her pen. We'll start with an official fraud complaint. I'll send everything to the police fraud division and the district attorney's office. It'll take time, but once they see the evidence you've got, they'll move. I nodded, my throat tight. And the debt? We'll get it cleared, she said firmly. But you have to be patient. Patience, the one thing I was running out of. A few days later, Caroline got in touch with the financial institution that had approved the loan. When the representative called me, he sounded uneasy. Miss Harper, he said. We reviewed your case, and I must say it's highly unusual. The application was indeed submitted with your information, but the verification call was taken from a different number than the one we have on file for you. Whose number? I asked, already knowing the answer. He hesitated. It matches the number of a woman named Julia Daniels. Hearing her name, spoken in that clinical tone, sent a rush of heat to my cheeks. I could almost see her face, the smug smile, the confidence that she could get away with this. Thank you, I said coldly. That's exactly what I needed. The next step was contacting Julia's workplace. Caroline filed a subpoena to request her computer logs. It took a week, but when the data came back, it was damning. Julia had accessed my financial information from her work computer the same week the loan application was submitted. I stared at the printout in Caroline's office, hands trembling slightly. She used her job's computer? Is she insane? Caroline gave a small smile. Desperate people make dumb decisions. This was her mistake, and it's going to bury her. It was all there. Timestamps, IP addresses, login records. She couldn't deny it. But while the case built momentum legally, emotionally I was still barely holding it together. My nights were restless. My mind replayed every memory of Julia, her laugh, her kindness. The nights we'd shared wine and secrets. How could that person and this one be the same? One evening, I sat in my car outside her office, watching her through the glass windows. She looked so normal, laughing with coworkers, sipping coffee. I wanted to storm in there and scream, but I didn't. Instead, I stayed still, reminding myself that I didn't need revenge. I needed proof, and I already had it. That weekend, I got a notification from my lawyer. The DA's office was officially opening an investigation. Julia and Scott were both under review for fraud. I sat on my couch, reading that email over and over, hardly believing it. I didn't celebrate. Not yet, because deep down, I knew Julia wouldn't stay quiet for long. Sure enough, 2 days later, I got a call from an unknown number. Tessa? It was Julia's voice, hesitant, but too calm. I froze. What do you want? She sighed dramatically. Can we please talk like adults? You're blowing this way out of proportion. Out of proportion? I laughed bitterly. You stole my identity and ruined my credit. What's the right proportion for that, Julia? It's not like that, she said, her voice rising. Scott messed up, okay? He's the one who took out the loan. I just tried to help him fix it. You tried to fix it by putting it in my name? There was a pause. Then she snapped. You can't prove it was me. I almost laughed at how predictable she was. Actually, I said softly, I can. The silence on the other end was deafening. What do you mean? She finally whispered. I mean your work computer logs, your emails, your IP address. All of it points back to you. So maybe call your lawyer before you call me again. Her breathing grew sharp. You think you're better than me? You think this makes you innocent? No, I said. It just makes me done. I hung up. That night, I forwarded the call recording to Caroline. She was thrilled. Perfect. That's intimidation and self-incrimination. She just dug her own grave. It should have made me feel vindicated. Instead, I just felt tired. So tired. Over the next few days, collectors stopped calling. Caroline had sent cease and desist notices while the fraud claim was under review. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. But the calm didn't last long. I woke one morning to find my car's windshield cracked, a rock still lying on the hood. No note, no witnesses. I didn't need one. I knew exactly who had done it. I called Landon immediately. "She's lashing out," he said. "Don't engage. Let her self-destruct." And that's exactly what I planned to do. I wasn't going to scream or beg or cry. I was going to be quiet, strategic, and patient. Because I'd learned something about revenge. It doesn't always come with shouting or fire. Sometimes it's delivered calmly, with evidence neatly stacked in a folder. But time was running out. Collectors were already calling my phone nonstop. Julia finally called me, pretending everything was normal. It had been 2 weeks since the DA opened the investigation, and I'd heard nothing from her until that morning. My phone buzzed as I was brewing coffee, and her name flashed on the screen like a ghost I'd tried to forget. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hey, Tess," she said, her tone nauseatingly cheerful. "It's been a while. How are you?" "How am I?" I repeated flatly. "Julia, what do you think?" She sighed, pretending confusion. "Look, I know things got a little messy, but can't we just talk? Talk about what? How you stole my identity? Or how you forged my signature?" She let out a nervous laugh, the kind she used when she was cornered. "You're making it sound worse than it is. Scott and I just..." "Stop," I cut her off. "Don't say his name like that excuses anything." There was a pause. I could hear her breathing on the other end, shallow and uneven. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said softly. "I swear, we were desperate, Tess. Scott's business fell apart. We were drowning. And so you decided to use me as a lifeboat?" I snapped. Her voice hardened. "You have good credit, Tessa. You've always been so careful, so perfect. You'd have survived this. We just needed a little time to fix it." I felt my hands tremble with rage. "You didn't even ask me," I said, my voice low. "You made me your scapegoat. You didn't give me a choice." "I didn't have one either," she shouted suddenly, her calm mask slipping. "You don't know what it's like to watch everything crumble and feel like you can't breathe." "Then you should have asked for help, Julia," I yelled back. "I would have helped you. I always have." Her silence was deafening. The memories came flooding in, covering her rent when she was short, paying her car insurance when she forgot, staying up nights helping her fix her resume. I'd always been there. And now, she'd repaid me with betrayal. "You used me because you knew I'd trust you," I said finally, my voice shaking. "That's not desperation, Julia. That's cruelty." For a second, I thought I heard her choke up. But then she said, coldly, "You think you're better than me. You always have." "Better?" I repeated, stunned. "No, just not a liar." She hung up on me. I stood there for a long moment, my coffee gone cold on the counter, my reflection in the window looking back like someone I didn't recognize. I wasn't the same woman who'd once laughed with Julia over wine and holiday movies. That woman was gone. I called Caroline, my lawyer, right after. "She called me," I said, recounting the conversation. Caroline's tone sharpened. "Good. That means she's panicking. The DA's office will love that." "Did you record it?" "I did," I said quietly. "Perfect. Forward it to me. The more emotional she gets, the better." I sent her the recording. Then, I sat on my couch, scrolling through old pictures again, this time not out of sadness but anger. Each photo was a lie. Each smile, a mask. The more I looked, the more I realized how long she'd been manipulating me. She'd always been jealous of my stability, my calm. I could see it now in the way she'd downplayed my promotions, or joked that my life was too perfect to be real. She didn't want my friendship. She wanted my identity. Over the next few days, I tried to move on. I focused on work, therapy, anything that grounded me. But then, Julia started popping up in the periphery again. A mutual friend, Carla, texted me out of the blue. "Julia says you're spreading lies about her. What's going on?" I clenched my jaw and replied, "I'm not spreading lies. I'm proving crimes." Carla didn't respond after that. I didn't blame her. Julia had always been charismatic, the kind of woman who could spin a story so convincingly that people believed her even when the evidence screamed otherwise. But this time, I had something she didn't proof. A few days later, Caroline called me with an update. "They're preparing charges," she said. "Once the bank finishes its internal audit, Julia and Scott will be officially named as suspects." Hearing that made my pulse quicken. After weeks of helplessness, there was finally movement. Justice was on the horizon. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat by the window, staring at the twinkling city lights. It hit me that Julia was probably doing the same thing somewhere else, except her lights were fading, one by one. I thought about calling her, telling her it wasn't too late to come clean, but I knew better. People like Julia didn't apologize, they deflected. They twisted stories until they became victims of their own lies. A few days later, I found a small envelope slipped under my apartment door. No return address. Inside was a folded note in Julia's handwriting. "You've made a mistake, Tess. Stop before you ruin both of us." I stared at it, my anger simmering into something colder. She was still trying to control the narrative, still trying to manipulate me into silence. I placed the note next to the growing stack of evidence. Another receipt. Another piece of the puzzle. Julia might have thought she could guilt me, scare me, or talk her way out. But she didn't realize something crucial: I wasn't scared anymore. For the first time in my life, I was done playing the role of the forgiving friend. This wasn't about friendship anymore. It was about survival. I was no longer just defending my name, I was reclaiming it. I wasn't going to bounce back, I was going to hit back. I decided to play along and let Julia think I was giving up. Every instinct in me wanted to fight, to expose her, immediately, to scream the truth to everyone who'd ever known us. But Caroline kept repeating the same advice. "Be patient, Tessa. Let her think she's winning. That's how you'll beat her." So, I took a deep breath and did what felt impossible. I went silent. I stopped posting on social media, stopped responding to mutual friends, even stopped checking in with Landon for a few days. To Julia, it probably looked like I'd finally given up, that the stress had broken me down. But behind the curtain, I was quietly building the perfect trap. The DA's office had officially opened an active case. Caroline said they were reviewing financial records and tracing every transaction Julia had made under my name. "If she forged your signature once," Caroline explained, "she's probably done it before. This could be bigger than just one loan." And she was right. Landon uncovered 3 smaller credit accounts opened under variations of my name, one using my middle initial, one using my maiden name, and one with a typo in my address. It was subtle, but all of them pointed back to Julia's email. The realization made me sick. She'd been doing this for months, maybe years, and I'd never seen it coming. But I wasn't just sitting back either. Every interaction I had with her from that point forward, I documented. Every text, every voicemail, every delivery to my apartment, I kept it all. I wanted a record of every move she made, every word she spoke. And then, out of nowhere, Julia started reaching out again. It began with a text. "Hey, thinking about you. Can we talk?" Then another. "I know you're mad, but I miss my best friend." I didn't reply. 2 days later, she showed up at my workplace. I spotted her through the glass doors before she entered, her hair styled perfectly, makeup flawless, like she hadn't just been caught committing fraud. "Tess," she said, smiling too brightly, "can we talk for a sec?" I crossed my arms. "You shouldn't be here." She tilted her head. "Come on, we've known each other forever. Don't do this." I wanted to scream, but instead, I just looked at her and said calmly, "You should leave before I call security." Her smile faltered, and I caught a flicker of fear behind her eyes. She turned and walked away quickly, muttering something under her breath. As soon as she was gone, I emailed Caroline and Landon. "She's starting to panic," Caroline replied. "Good. Let her unravel." That weekend, Julia tried another tactic. A delivery arrived at my apartment, an expensive gift basket filled with chocolates, wine, and a handwritten note. The note said, "I'm sorry for everything. Let's start over. Merry early Christmas." I should have thrown it out, but instead I carefully slipped the note into a plastic folder and placed it with the rest of my evidence. Because that note wasn't just an apology, it was another mistake. The handwriting matched perfectly with the forged loan documents. Landon confirmed it after comparing samples. "You've got her," he said with a grin. "This is as good as a confession." For the first time in months, I felt a sense of power returning. The girl who'd once felt powerless and humiliated was now in control. One quiet step at a time. But still, I waited. I wanted Julia to feel safe again, to think I'd moved on. Because when she least expected it, I was going to turn her entire world upside down. In early December, almost a year since the nightmare began, Julia hosted her annual holiday party. It was her tradition: lavish decorations, too much champagne, and a carefully curated guest list of people she wanted to impress. I got an invitation. At first, I thought it was some kind of cruel joke. Then I realized it was something else entirely: arrogance. She thought she'd beaten me. Caroline advised against going, but Landon thought otherwise. "It might be worth it," he said. "She's cocky when she feels untouchable. You might get something useful out of it." So I went. I showed up in a simple black dress, the opposite of flashy. When I walked into her home, the scent of cinnamon and pine filled the air. Everything sparkled: white lights, gold ribbon, perfect smiles. Julia spotted me almost immediately and froze, wine glass halfway to her lips. "Tessa," she said finally, regaining her composure. "You came." "Of course," I said with a polite smile. "It's tradition, right?" Her husband, Scott, appeared beside her, grinning that smug, oily grin that made my skin crawl. "Didn't think you'd show your face around here again," he said. "Oh, I wouldn't miss it," I replied. "You two throw quite the party." I mingled with guests, acting perfectly cordial while Julia watched me from across the room. She kept trying to read me, but I didn't give her anything. I laughed, smiled, drank a little wine, but every word, every glance was calculated. Before I left, I walked up to her and handed her a small wrapped gift. "A peace offering," I said softly. She looked startled but smiled awkwardly. "That's really sweet of you. Open it later," I told her, "when things quiet down." Inside that little box was a USB drive labeled "Receipts." On it were copies of every document, every message, every fake account she'd ever used. I'd even included the scan of her apology note, side by side with the forged signature on the loan. That was my final move. I left her house that night, with snow falling softly around me, the cold air biting at my cheeks. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm, steady. I knew the next few days would change everything. Because when she plugged that drive into her computer, she'd realize she wasn't holding the upper hand anymore. I wasn't scared of her lies. I had proof. And soon, so would everyone else. Now I had the smoking gun and I was ready to light the match. Julia invited me to her Christmas party the following year. Bold move. If you'd told me a year earlier that I'd willingly walk into that woman's house again, I'd have laughed in your face. But that night wasn't about friendship or forgiveness, it was about closure. The days leading up to the party were eerily quiet. The DA's office was finalizing charges, the bank had frozen the fraudulent accounts, and Caroline told me we were in the home stretch. I just needed to stay composed. No confrontation, no emotional outburst, just patience. Julia must have thought I'd forgotten everything. That time had healed the wound she created. She even sent me a text 2 days before the party. "Can't wait to see you. Let's put last year behind us. I've missed my friend." I read that message 3 times, disgusted. She was either delusional or dangerously confident. But I didn't respond. I didn't have to. She'd get her response soon enough. When I arrived that night, her house looked like a scene out of a holiday magazine. Golden lights draped across the porch, a massive wreath hung on the door, and laughter spilled out into the freezing air. Everything screamed perfect, which was exactly her style: appearance over substance. Inside, the place sparkled. The tree was enormous, covered in ornaments that glittered like they'd been hand-picked by angels. A live band played soft jazz in the corner while guests sipped champagne and complimented Julia on her flawless decor. She spotted me almost instantly. For a split second, shock flashed across her face before she plastered on that familiar fake smile. "Tessa!" she exclaimed, rushing over with open arms. "I didn't think you'd actually come." I smiled politely and hugged her back just long enough for appearances. "It's Christmas. I figured it was time to let things go." Her shoulders relaxed just slightly. "I'm so glad. I hate that things got weird between us." "Weird?" I echoed, tilting my head. "That's one word for it." She laughed, missing the sharpness in my tone. "Come on, let's get you a drink." Scott joined us soon after, holding a glass of scotch and looking as smug as ever. "Well, if it isn't the comeback kid," he said. "No hard feelings, right?" I smiled. "None at all." He chuckled, clearly amused by what he thought was my defeat. I could feel Julia watching me carefully, probably trying to gauge whether I was still angry. I gave her nothing, no emotion, no tension, just polite small talk. As the night went on, I mingled with guests, laughing when appropriate, nodding through conversations. I even complimented Julia's decorations, which made her beam with pride. On the surface, it probably looked like two old friends patching things up. But beneath that calm exterior, my plan was already unfolding. The small box I'd handed her earlier, wrapped in silver paper with a red bow, sat on the coffee table near the tree. Every so often, she glanced at it. Curious. She probably thought it was some kind of sentimental gift. She had no idea that what was inside would unravel everything she'd built on lies. Around 10 o'clock, guests started leaving. Julia hugged each one, smiling radiantly. She looked like a woman who believed she'd won back her reputation, her stability, her peace. I stood near the door, waiting for the right moment. When she finally turned back to me, her expression softened. "I really am glad you came, Tess. I've missed you more than you know." I forced a gentle smile. "I'm glad too. You should open your gift later tonight when things quiet down." She nodded, intrigued. "What is it?" I shrugged. "Something to help you remember who I really am." For the first time that evening, confusion flickered across her face. But before she could ask anything else, I grabbed my coat. "Merry Christmas, Julia," I said softly. She smiled. Uncertainly. "Merry Christmas." I walked out into the snow, my breath visible in the cold air. The night was still, almost peaceful. Behind me, I could still hear the muffled sounds of laughter and music fading as the door closed. But that peace was deceptive. Because while she was pouring herself another drink and admiring her tree, I knew what was waiting for her on that little USB drive. A perfectly organized record of her crimes. Every fake account, every forged signature, every text that tied her to the fraud. Caroline had already sent the police the same data earlier that day. The drive wasn't just a copy, it was a warning. When Julia opened it, she'd see exactly what I'd seen, a timeline of her own lies unraveling, piece by piece. The best part? I wouldn't even have to be there to watch it happen. I got into my car, started the engine, and sat there for a long moment, staring at the glowing windows of her house. It looked so warm, so inviting, like the perfect picture of happiness. But I knew that picture was about to burn. I didn't feel joy or triumph. What I felt was something quieter, heavier relief. For the first time since she'd handed me that cursed envelope last Christmas, I wasn't afraid anymore. I was in control. As I drove away, snowflakes swirled around the headlights like tiny sparks, melting on the windshield and disappearing into nothing. The next morning, everything would change. Because tomorrow, that USB drive would be in the hands of the police. The next morning, I got the call I'd been waiting for. It was still dark outside, and the coffee pot had just started percolating when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I would have ignored it, but something in my gut told me to pick up. "Miss Harper?" a calm male voice asked. "This is Detective Raymond from the Nashville Fraud and Financial Crimes Division. We need you to come in this morning." For a second, I couldn't breathe. "Is this about Julia Daniels?" "Yes, ma'am," he said. "We executed a warrant at her residence early this morning. I think you'll want to hear the details in person." The coffee machine gurgled in the background as my mind raced. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I threw on a coat and barely remembered to grab my keys. My heart pounded all the way to the precinct. The drive felt endless, even though it was only 15 minutes. Snow blanketed the city, glowing faintly under the streetlights. It was eerily beautiful, like the world was holding its breath. When I arrived, Detective Raymond met me in the lobby. He was tall, graying at the temples, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much deceit. "Miss Harper," he said, shaking my hand. "Thank you for coming in. We wanted to update you in person since you initiated the complaint." He led me into a small conference room where another officer sat with a laptop open. I could see photos on the screen, stacks of papers, credit cards, and what looked like mail. My name was visible on more than one envelope. "We executed a search warrant on the Daniels residence at 6 this morning," he began. "Your friend Julia was present, along with her husband, Scott. During the search, we recovered multiple forged loan documents, counterfeit identification cards, and evidence of other identity thefts." I swallowed hard. "Other victims?" He nodded grimly. "3, so far. You were the largest account, though. The evidence suggests you were targeted because of your clean record and credit score." Hearing it laid out so bluntly felt surreal. I wasn't just part of a bad decision, I was part of a criminal operation. "What about Julia?" I asked quietly. "She was taken into custody. She initially claimed she had no knowledge of the fraud, that her husband acted alone." I gave a hollow laugh. "Of course she did." The detective scrolled to another photo. "But we found something else, a USB drive on her desk labeled receipts. Recognize that?" I smiled faintly. "Yeah. That was my Christmas gift to her." He raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued. "It contained a complete digital record of the fraud documents, email logs, even the notes she wrote to you. We confirmed her handwriting on several items matched the forged signatures. She essentially handed us her own confession. The satisfaction that washed over me wasn't loud or vengeful, it was quiet, steady, and deeply human. For the first time in nearly a year, I felt vindicated." "Scott?" I asked. "Also in custody," the detective said. "He claims he was following her lead. We'll see what the evidence says." I sat back in the chair, the tension in my body finally starting to unravel. I'd dreamed of this moment, but I never imagined it would actually come. Detective Raymond slid a document across the table. "The DA will likely reach out soon for a formal statement. You'll be notified when the case goes to court. For now, you can rest easy, your name's been cleared with the bank. They've already confirmed you're not responsible for any of the fraudulent debts." I let out a shaky breath. "Thank you," I whispered. He nodded. "You did everything right, Miss Harper. Most victims never keep the kind of documentation you did. You saved yourself." As I left the precinct, I stepped into the biting morning air, the city still quiet from the snowstorm. I stood there for a long moment, watching the pale light break over the horizon. My body felt light, my chest open for the first time in months. The call to Caroline came next. She picked up immediately. "Tell me everything," she demanded. I laughed, half crying. "They got her. Both of them. And the best part? She turned in the evidence herself." Caroline chuckled, a sound of pure relief. "Oh, Tessa, that's poetic justice if I've ever heard it." I spent the rest of the day in a strange daze. Relief mixed, with disbelief, exhaustion tangled with triumph. I hadn't realized how much I'd been holding my breath until now. I went home, brewed another pot of coffee, and sat by the window watching the snow fall. The phone didn't ring that day, not a single collector, not a single threat. The silence felt sacred. Later that evening, Landon stopped by to check in. He leaned against my counter, grinning. "You did it," he said. "Not many people get to see justice this clean." I smiled weakly. "It doesn't feel like winning, it feels like surviving." He nodded. "That's how you know it's real." When he left, I walked over to my fireplace and pulled out the red envelope Julia had given me a year ago, the one that started it all. I'd kept it tucked away in a box, unable to throw it out. I turned it over in my hands, tracing the gold ribbon with my thumb. For a moment, I thought about burning it, but then I stopped. It wasn't just a reminder of betrayal anymore, it was proof of how far I'd come. I slipped it back into the box and whispered to myself, never again. As night fell, I felt a peace I hadn't known in months. Not the kind that comes from revenge, but the kind that comes from closure. The case wasn't over yet, but my nightmare was. The storm had passed, and I'd made it through. But the real satisfaction came from knowing Julia's mask had finally fallen. Julia tried to blame Scott for everything, but it didn't work. The arrest made the local papers within 2 days. Nashville couple accused of identity fraud scheme. I remember staring at the headline on my phone, my hands trembling slightly as I scrolled through the article. They didn't name me, thankfully, but the description made it obvious. A local woman in her 30s who had filed the complaint. That was me. It was strange, seeing our lives summarized in a few paragraphs of cold, factual text. The story mentioned the forged documents, the fraudulent accounts, and the estimated damage. Over $120,000 in total fraud. I expected to feel vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. People started calling old friends, coworkers, even acquaintances from high school. They wanted the story. Some acted sympathetic, others were just curious. I kept my answers short. It's being handled legally. But what struck me most was the silence from mutual friends. The ones who used to fill my weekends with brunches and game nights suddenly disappeared. No one wanted to take sides, and that silence stung worse than any gossip. A week after the article ran, Caroline called me with an update. They're both being held until arraignment, she said. But their lawyers are already turning on each other. Julia's saying it was all Scott's idea. He's saying she masterminded everything. I leaned back in my chair, shaking my head. That sounds about right. She's claiming he coerced her, Caroline continued, that she didn't know the full extent of what he was doing. Please, I muttered. She forged my signature with her own hand. She knew exactly what she was doing. Caroline sighed. The evidence supports you completely. You don't need to worry. But prepare yourself, the defense might still drag your name through the mud. That's how these cases work. And she was right. A few days later, a local gossip blog ran a piece suggesting the victim might have been complicit in the scheme. They didn't use my name, but the implication was clear. I was furious at first, but Caroline told me not to react. The truth will stand, she said. Then, something unexpected happened. I got a message from Carla, one of our mutual friends who'd gone quiet after the story broke. Tess, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what to believe before. But after seeing the evidence on the news, I just wanted you to know I believe you now. For the first time, I felt a small measure of validation. Slowly, the word spread about the mountain of proof against Julia and Scott. Screenshots of their texts leaked online. Someone from Julia's office even came forward anonymously, confirming that she'd used her work computer to access my data. The illusion of her innocence crumbled completely. According to the detective's updates, Julia had broken down during interrogation. She tried to claim she'd been trapped by her husband, that she'd only gone along with the fraud to protect him. But Scott didn't protect her in return. He'd given a full statement blaming her for everything. He painted himself as a bystander. Their marriage disintegrated almost instantly. When the hearing finally came, I attended quietly, sitting in the back of the courtroom. Julia walked in wearing an orange jumpsuit, her wrists cuffed. For a moment, she looked like a stranger. Her hair was dull, her confidence gone. When her eyes met mine across the room, something flickered. Anger, shame. Maybe both. She looked away quickly. The prosecutor laid out everything. The forged documents, the IP logs, the bank records. It was methodical, factual, devastating. When they showed the photos of the USB drive labeled receipts, Julia's lawyer tried to object, but the judge overruled him. I didn't need to hear the verdict to know how it would end. The court found both Julia and Scott guilty, she of identity theft, fraud, and forgery, he of aiding and abetting. Julia got 6 years, Scott got 3. Neither of them looked at each other as the sentence was read. Afterward, Caroline hugged me outside the courthouse. "It's over," she said softly. But was it? Because as much as I wanted closure, there was still a lingering ache. This wasn't a victory parade, it was the funeral of a friendship, the end of something I once thought was unbreakable. Over the next few weeks, I started rebuilding. The bank formally restored my credit. My name was cleared across every database. The debt that haunted me was officially gone. Yet I found myself lying awake some nights, wondering if I could have done something, anything to stop her from turning into the person she became. I kept asking myself, was there a moment I missed? A sign I ignored? Maybe there was. But I'd finally accepted that Julia's choices weren't mine to carry. One afternoon, I got a call from Detective Raymond. "Just wanted to let you know," he said. "The Daniels case is officially closed. You can move forward." I thanked him quietly, my throat tight. After hanging up, I walked to the window. Outside, the first hints of spring were melting the last of the snow. The world looked clean again. Julia's voice echoed faintly in my mind, her laughter, her lies, her final desperate text. She'd lost everything because of her own greed. And in a strange, quiet way, that was justice. And I hadn't lifted a single malicious finger, just the truth. After the trial, I struggled to trust anyone again. The relief of winning in court was supposed to feel like freedom, but instead, it felt like walking out of a wreck. I was standing, but the ground beneath me didn't feel stable yet. My body had survived, but my heart was bruised beyond recognition. For months, I'd lived on pure adrenaline: lawyers, police meetings, paperwork, investigations. When it was all finally over, there was a void. I didn't know how to exist without the constant need to defend myself. I'd been so focused on surviving Julia's storm that I'd forgotten what calm felt like. The first thing I did was take time off work. My boss, who'd been incredibly understanding through everything, encouraged me to reclaim my peace. So I did. I packed a small suitcase, turned off my phone, and rented a cabin in the Smoky Mountains for a week. The first few days, the silence was overwhelming. No buzzing phones, no legal updates, no fake apologies. Just wind, trees, and my own thoughts. It was terrifying at first, then healing. One morning, I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket, sipping coffee as the sun rose over the misty hills. I thought about Julia. Not with anger this time, but with a sort of distant sadness. How someone I once loved like a sister had chosen deceit over honesty. I whispered out loud. "You could have just asked me for help." My voice vanished into the air, carried away like smoke. When I got home, I started therapy. It wasn't easy. The first few sessions, I could barely talk without crying. My therapist, Dr. Howard, listened quietly as I tried to make sense of the chaos. "You experienced a trauma," she said gently. "And trauma doesn't just end because the case is over. You have to rebuild who you are now, someone who's lived through betrayal and still chooses to trust." That hit me hard. Because the truth was, I didn't want to trust anyone again. I'd built walls around myself so high that even kindness made me suspicious. "Doctor." Howard gave me homework. Write a letter to Julia that I would never send. I poured everything into it: my rage, my heartbreak, my confusion. I ended it with one line that surprised even me. "I forgive you, but I'll never forget." Writing it didn't erase the pain, but it loosened its grip on me. Little by little, I started finding myself again. I reconnected with friends I'd pushed away. I went to dinner with Carla, who apologized tearfully for doubting me during the ordeal. "I didn't know what to believe," she said. "Julia always seemed so sincere." "She was," I said quietly, "just not about the right things." We laughed a little after that, the kind of laugh that feels fragile but real. My family had been my anchor through everything. My mom called every day, checking in even when I didn't feel like talking. My brother, who lived out of state, sent me a care package filled with silly things: candles, cozy socks, chocolate bars with a note that said, "For the new beginning you deserve." That phrase stuck with me. The new beginning I deserved. I decided to honor it. I moved to a new apartment across town, a small sunlit space with white walls and a balcony. No ghosts of the past there, no memories of Julia showing up uninvited or dropping off deceit wrapped in ribbon. Just quiet, just mine. I changed my phone number, closed my old email accounts, and opened a new one under a fresh name. It felt symbolic, like wiping away fingerprints from a shattered mirror. Slowly, I started to feel like myself again, or maybe a different version of myself. Stronger, wiser, more careful, but not cold. Then, one afternoon while scrolling online, I found a local volunteer group that helped victims of financial fraud rebuild their lives, teaching them how to recover credit, file police reports, and recognize manipulation. Something about it pulled at me. The next week, I joined. Helping others who'd gone through similar pain was unexpectedly healing. I saw the same fear in their eyes that I once carried, and I realized how far I'd come. When I shared my story during a support session without naming names, of course I watched heads nod in understanding. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was helping others survive too. Months passed. Seasons changed. I started sleeping through the night again. I stopped checking my locks 3 times before bed. I began to trust myself again, to believe that I could rebuild a life that wasn't defined by what she did to me. One evening, after a particularly moving group session, I came home to an envelope in my mailbox. My stomach tightened when I saw it handwritten, "No return address." For a moment, my heart raced. Terrified it was from her. But it wasn't. It was from the local bank, an official letter confirming that my credit was fully restored, all fraudulent activity removed. I stood in the hallway, reading it under the dim light. My name, my real, untarnished name printed clearly. At the top. No debt, no damage. Just freedom. I smiled through tears, whispering, I got it back. My life, my name, my peace. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about recovery. I had finally stopped surviving Julia's betrayal and started living my own truth again. And for the first time in over a year, I could look in the mirror and recognize the woman staring back at me, not broken, not bitter, but whole. But one unexpected message soon reminded me that my past wasn't done with me. Julia wrote to me from prison, begging for forgiveness. The letter came on a gray Tuesday morning, about 3 months after the sentencing. It arrived in a thin, plain white envelope with my name printed in handwriting I hadn't seen since that cursed Christmas. My stomach dropped the second I recognized it. I stood in my kitchen for a long time, just staring at it. I told myself not to open it. I told myself I didn't need to hear whatever lies or manipulations she had left in her. But curiosity, the same weakness that had once made me trust her, won out. The letter began simply, Tessa, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from, but please, just read this before you decide what to do with it. I've had a lot of time to think about what I did. I know I hurt you. I know I broke something we'll never get back. But I want you to understand why. I sank into a chair, my eyes scanning every word. Scott pressured me. You know how he is charming, manipulative, controlling. He told me we'd lose the house if we didn't come up with the money. He said no one would get hurt. He promised it was temporary. I never thought it would spiral this far. I scoffed aloud. Even from behind bars, she was still rewriting the story. You were my best friend, Tess. I didn't do it to hurt you. I did it because I thought you'd forgive me. Because you always have. You're strong. And I was weak. I thought you could handle it. I thought I could fix it before you even noticed. I stopped reading for a moment, pressing my hand against my chest. My heart was pounding, not with sadness, but disbelief. She hadn't learned anything. She wasn't sorry, she was rationalizing. Please. If there's any part of you that remembers the good times, don't let this be how you remember me. I've lost everything, Scott, my job, my friends. You're the only person who can help me now. My lawyer says a letter from you could help reduce my sentence. You don't even have to say much, just that you believe I'm not a bad person. Just someone who made mistakes. There it was. The real reason for the letter. Not guilt, not remorse. Strategy. I folded the letter slowly and set it on the table. My hands were trembling, but not from sadness. From anger. After everything she'd done, she still saw me as a resource, something to use, something to manipulate. Even in prison, she hadn't stopped playing her games. I stood up, pacing the room. The audacity of it made my blood boil. She had stolen my name, my credit, my peace, and now she wanted me to help her. My therapist's words echoed in my mind. Forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation, Tessa. It means freedom. You can forgive her without ever letting her back into your life. So, I sat down, took out a blank piece of paper, and started writing. Not for her lawyer, not for the judge, for me. Julia, I did read your letter. You're right about one thing: you've had time to think. I have too. And I've realized something. Forgiveness isn't for you. It's for me. I don't owe you a second chance. I don't owe you a defense. You say you were weak, but you weren't. You made choices, cruel, deliberate ones. You used my trust as a weapon and expected me to clean up your mess. I did, but not for you. For me. You want me to write the court and say you're not a bad person. But Julia, bad people don't think about who they hurt when they act, they only think about getting away with it. You might have convinced yourself that you're sorry, but I don't believe you understand what that means. I forgive you, but not because you deserve it. I forgive you because I refuse to carry you with me anymore. You're no longer my problem. You're a story I survived. I signed it but didn't date it. Then I stared at it for a long time before folding it up and slipping it into my desk drawer. I never sent it. Because she didn't deserve my words, my ink, or even my acknowledgement. Later that evening, I took her letter, the one that began with, "You deserve this," from that first Christmas, and framed it in glass. I hung it on the wall of my new apartment, not out of spite, but as a reminder. Every time I looked at it, I remembered how far I'd come. That I'd been broken and rebuilt stronger than before. Weeks passed after that, and the prison letters stopped. I assumed she'd realized I wasn't going to help her. Life began to settle again into something resembling normal. But one afternoon, while sorting through mail, I found another envelope. The handwriting wasn't hers this time, it was from the prison administration. Inside was a short notice stating that Julia Daniels had been transferred to another facility pending investigation for misconduct. No details, no explanation. I stared at the letter, feeling a strange mix of relief and dread. It seemed even behind bars, Julia couldn't help herself. Manipulation was in her bones. I poured a glass of wine that night and sat by the window, watching the city lights shimmer. I felt calm, steady, certain. Julia's world was small now: bars, walls, and consequences. Mine was wide open. I'd forgiven her. But that didn't mean I'd forgotten. Forgiveness was freedom. Forgetting was foolish. And I'd learned my lesson the hardest way possible. But Julia still had one more trick to play before disappearing from my life for good. 6 months later, I got a call from her lawyer. I was in my new office, surrounded by warm sunlight and the quiet hum of a printer, when my phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but I answered anyway, assuming it was a client. Instead, a crisp male voice said, "Miss Harper, this is Alan Reese, legal representative for Julia Daniels. Do you have a moment to talk?" My body went cold. I hadn't heard her name in months, not out loud, not since the letter she'd sent from prison. I thought that part of my life was finally sealed. "What's this about?" I asked cautiously. He cleared his throat. "Julia has filed a motion to appeal her conviction. She's claiming she was coerced into the fraudulent activities by an outside party." I felt my jaw tighten. "Let me guess, her outside party is me." There was a pause. "She's suggesting that you were aware of the financial arrangements and that you benefited from them." I laughed, an ugly, disbelieving sound. "She's trying to frame me again? I'm not accusing you of anything," he said quickly. "I'm just calling to inform you that we'll be submitting a subpoena for additional testimony." The rest of his words blurred into a low hum. I could barely hear him over the rush of blood in my ears. The anger that had gone quiet inside me reignited like a spark to gasoline. After everything, after the trial, the sentencing, the forgiveness, she was still trying to drag me down with her. When the call ended, I sat at my desk in stunned silence. My hands trembled slightly as I picked up my phone and called Caroline. She answered on the first ring. "Hey, what's wrong?" "She's trying to appeal," I said, my voice shaking. "She's claiming I was involved." Caroline didn't even sound surprised. I had a feeling she might try something like this. People like Julia don't accept responsibility, they rewrite history until it fits. "She's already ruined so much," I whispered. "I can't go through this again." "You won't have to," Caroline assured me. "Her claim won't hold up. The evidence is airtight. But I'll file a counter motion to shut it down immediately. You just stay calm." Stay calm. Easier said than done. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Every shadow in my room reminding me of her, the lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. I'd thought she was gone for good, but Julia had a way of clawing her way back into my peace, even from behind bars. The next morning, Caroline called again. "We're filing a motion to dismiss her appeal. The prosecutor's office is backing us. Don't worry, this won't go far." "Do I have to testify?" I asked. "Maybe. But it'll be brief. Just restate your side and let the documents speak for themselves. You've already won this fight once." A week later, the hearing took place. I sat in the courtroom again, in the same cold seat as before. Julia appeared on a screen via video link from prison. She looked different, older, harder, her once carefully maintained confidence replaced with something brittle and desperate. The judge asked her to explain her appeal. Julia's lawyer began, spinning a story so twisted it almost made me laugh. According to her, I had convinced her and Scott to take the loan, claiming I'd handle the details and knew people in the banking industry. I wanted to scream, but I stayed still. My calm was my weapon. When it was my turn to speak, I stood, my voice steady. "Your Honor, there isn't a single piece of evidence supporting her claim. Everything from the IP addresses to the handwriting to the email records ties directly to Julia Daniels. Not me." I handed the court my binder of evidence, every receipt, every record, every detail Caroline had taught me to keep. Julia glared at me through the screen, her eyes sharp, venomous. "You think you're better than me," she hissed suddenly, her voice echoing through the speaker system. The judge banged the gavel. "Miss Daniels, that's enough." But she wasn't done. "You ruined my life, Tessa. You wanted this." I took a slow breath. "No," I said evenly. "You ruined your own life when you tried to ruin mine." The courtroom went silent. The judge turned to Julia's lawyer, visibly unimpressed. "This appeal is dismissed with prejudice. Miss Daniels will not be permitted to refile." Dismissed, 2 syllables that felt like a mountain lifting off my chest. Julia's face fell, her mask cracking completely. For the first time, I saw her not as my old friend or my betrayer, but as something smaller, just a person trapped by her own lies. As the feed cut off, she shouted something unintelligible. The screen went black. Caroline smiled at me from across the table. "It's over, for real this time." But I didn't feel victorious. I felt empty. Driving home, I realized I wasn't angry anymore. Julia had become a ghost, one that no longer had power over me. Her voice, her letters, her manipulations, they couldn't touch me now. That night, I pulled out my old binder of evidence and looked through it one last time. I flipped through every page, every note, every receipt. Then, I closed it. I didn't burn it or throw it away. I just slid it onto the top shelf of my closet, a reminder, but no longer a burden. She had tried to rewrite history, but I'd already written the ending. I poured myself a cup of tea, sat by the window, and watched the rain fall against the glass. Somewhere, behind concrete walls, Julia was still plotting, still trying to twist the world to her will. But I didn't need revenge anymore. The truth had already done what revenge never could. It set me free. That was the day I stopped seeing myself as a victim. I was a survivor. A year later, I had rebuilt everything Julia tried to destroy. It's strange how quietly healing happens. There's no dramatic moment, No trumpet announcing your freedom, just mornings that don't hurt as much, nights that end in real sleep, and days when you realize you haven't thought about the pain in a while. One morning, as I sat on my balcony with coffee in hand, the sunlight hit my face, and I realized something simple but profound. I wasn't defined by what Julia did anymore. I was defined by what I did after. I'd left my old job months earlier. The company had been kind during my ordeal. But I needed a fresh start, new surroundings, new people who didn't know the story. I started a small consulting business, helping others rebuild their credit and navigate fraud recovery. I called it Receipts. At first, I thought the name was too on the nose, but Caroline had laughed when I told her. "It's perfect," she said. "It's who you are now." And she was right. The name carried history, pain, and power. It was a reminder that I'd survived by keeping proof of lies, of truth, of my resilience. Running the business gave me purpose. I met people who'd gone through their own kinds of betrayal, friends, family members, even spouses who'd stolen from them. Each story was different, but the ache was the same. When I shared my experience, people listened. They didn't see me as a victim. They saw me as someone who'd made it out. One of my first clients was a young woman named Amber, whose sister had emptied her savings account. When she cried during our session, saying, "I don't know how I'll ever trust anyone again," I handed her a tissue and said, "You don't have to yet. You just have to trust yourself." Her look of relief reminded me of my own first therapy session. Healing wasn't about pretending the wound never happened, it was about making sure it never owned you again. As Receipts grew, I began hosting free workshops at community centers, teaching people how to safeguard their identities, spot manipulation, and respond to fraud. Local news outlets occasionally interviewed me, calling me an advocate for financial justice. The first time I saw my name in print like that, I smiled not with pride, but with peace. Because I'd turned the ugliest part of my life into something useful. My therapist once told me, "Sometimes the best revenge is becoming the person your pain tried to destroy." I understood that now. One afternoon, while organizing client files, I came across a folder labeled Julia Case. My first instinct was to shove it back into the drawer, but instead, I opened it. Inside were copies of her letters, court documents, and photos of the evidence. It felt like looking at an old scar, ugly, but healed. I closed the folder and whispered, "Thank you for teaching me who not to be." Then I locked it away for good. My family visited that weekend to celebrate Receipts' one-year anniversary. My mom brought a homemade cake with "To Fresh Starts" written in frosting. We laughed until our sides hurt. At one point, my mom pulled me aside. "You look lighter," she said softly. "Like the weight's finally gone." "It is," I told her, and it was true. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood by the window watching snow start to fall, soft, quiet, gentle flakes that reminded me of that first Christmas morning. Only this time, I didn't feel dread. I felt gratitude. I poured myself a glass of wine and looked around my apartment, my safe space, my sanctuary. Everything here was mine. Earned, owned, protected. When I sat down at my desk, I noticed something I hadn't touched in months. The framed note Julia had once given me. The one that said, "You deserve this." I picked it up, running my fingers over the glass. It no longer felt like a curse. It felt like proof that she'd been wrong. I did deserve this, just not the pain she gave me. I deserved peace. I set the frame back down and smiled. The woman in the reflection wasn't broken anymore. Sometimes I thought about Julia, not often, but enough. I'd heard she was still in prison, that she'd tried and failed to appeal again. I didn't wish her harm. I didn't wish her anything. She simply didn't exist in my world anymore. I'd built something stronger out of the ashes she left behind. As I closed my laptop that night, snow still drifting outside the window, I whispered to myself, "You made it." Because I'd gone from being a name on a forged document to being the author of my own story again. And though the scars would always be there, they didn't hurt anymore. They just reminded me that I'd survived. Only this time, the gift I received was peace, and it was mine to keep. Years later, I still keep that envelope, the one she gave me. It sits at the bottom of a wooden box in my closet, beneath old photos, ticket stubs, and little pieces of my life that actually meant something. Sometimes, when the world gets quiet and I feel reflective, I take it out not to relive the pain, but to remember the lesson. That single envelope once represented betrayal, fear, and everything I thought I'd lost. Now it represents resilience. Proof that no matter how deep someone tries to bury you, truth always finds a way to dig itself out. It's strange, the things we keep. Some people hold on to love letters or family heirlooms. I hold on to a forged contract and a note that said, "You deserve this." Because in the end, I did deserve something, just not what Julia meant. I deserved clarity. I deserved growth. I deserved to take back my name. After everything, I finally learned that the strongest form of revenge isn't loud. It doesn't show up screaming or demanding justice. It just shows up, steady, successful, unbothered. That's who I became. Receipts, the business I built from the ashes of that ordeal, has grown more than I ever imagined. What started as one woman's mission to reclaim her identity turned into a thriving organization. We now host annual workshops for women recovering from financial abuse, identity theft, and manipulation. I've partnered with banks, schools, and nonprofits to teach others how to protect themselves. Each time I stand on a stage and share my story, I see faces in the audience light up, not because it's dramatic, but because it's real. People see themselves in my pain, and they see what's possible afterward. I always start my talks the same way. My name is Tessa Harper, and I'm not a victim. I'm a receipt. It usually earns a laugh, but it's true. Everything that once tried to destroy me became evidence of my strength. I no longer live waiting for the next betrayal. I live knowing I can survive one. Sometimes, I wonder if Julia ever thinks of me. Maybe she does when she hears my name on the radio or sees a headline about Receipts' success. Maybe she remembers how she once thought she could erase me and realizes now that she only made me more visible. Forgiveness took time. It wasn't a grand moment of peace, it was hundreds of small choices. Choosing not to hate her when I saw her name. Choosing to let go when I had every reason to hold on. Choosing to live my life as proof that I could. I don't forgive her for her sake. I forgive her for mine. Because hatred chains you to the past just as tightly as guilt. And I refuse to live chained to a story I've already survived. Last Christmas, my mom came over for dinner. We sat by the fire, laughing about how far things had come. When she went to grab another drink, she noticed the framed note on the wall, the one Julia had written. "You still keep that up?" she asked. Eyebrows raised. I smiled. "It reminds me where I came from." She studied it for a moment. "You really did turn pain into power, didn't you?" "I had to," I said softly. "Otherwise, it would have turned me into her." After she left, I stood by the fireplace, staring at the flickering flames reflecting off the glass frame. I realized then that my life had come full circle. A story that began with a Christmas gift meant to ruin me ended with one that rebuilt me. Because Julia didn't realize something important when she forged my name, she gave me the power to rewrite the ending. Now, when I teach others about documentation, protection, and self-advocacy, I always end with this. Keep your receipts, not just the financial ones but the emotional ones too. Every lie, every lesson, every moment you stood back up. They're proof that you made it through. Those receipts, both literal and figurative, are the reason I'm free. I may never understand why she did what she did, but I've stopped needing to. Some questions don't need answers. They just need closure. And I have mine. That night, as snow began to fall outside, I opened the box one last time. I pulled out that red envelope and held it in my hands. For a moment, I thought about throwing it away. But instead, I smiled and placed it back where it belonged at the bottom of the box, buried under memories that mattered more. Because it didn't deserve to be destroyed. It deserved to be outshined. I turned off the lights, letting the quiet fill my home. My life wasn't perfect, but it was honest. It was mine. I had my name back, my peace, my purpose, and that was everything. But scars can shine brighter than gold when you own every receipt.